This episode includes some details of a graphic nature. Please take care while listening.
911, Brown.
Yes, this is Officer Deuce from Jacksonville Beach.
Yes, sir.
Just had it reported that at the public boat basin on Seaway Court, Atlantic Beach, that there's a kid laying in a puddle of blood.
Okay, is this Atlantic Beach?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me transfer you to Atlantic Beach, okay?
And this is in Jacksonville area.
Okay, and do you know the address there?
It's the public boat basin off of Seaway Court.
Is there an intersection?
Green K.
Green K and C?
Seaway.
And do you know how old the child is?
No, I'm headed down there right now. The neighbor just came up and banged on my door and told me.
And this is a public boat ramp, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, we'll get police and rescue on the way, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I said this story started after the 911 calls. But there is a great deal more that came before the 911 calls and much more after. We need to go back to the beginning. This is the story of what happened on the night Joshua Hayes was murdered, before it spun so far beyond anyone's expectations. Chapter 6, August 10th, 1999. My name is Tristan Stewart-Robertson, and I've been reporting on communities in Scotland, Canada, and elsewhere for more than 20 years. I've hinted at parts of this already, but I need to be a bit more explicit. In Scotland's justice system, in almost all cases, if a reporter isn't in the courtroom, the case didn't happen. Let me repeat that. Without a reporter in the room, the case does not exist. There is no database to search for cases. There is no list of convictions. There is a court roll listing the day's cases in any court, and the cases for the next 3 or 4 days. At the end of each day, that day's list disappears. Relatively recently, Scotland's court service introduced a media portal. Once you register your details as a reporter, you can look up a name or case reference number by each individual court. That only gives you the upcoming 7 days' worth of cases. It lists the accused name, date of birth, and which piece of legislation was allegedly broken. There are no other details. And again, it disappears at the end of each day. From abroad, I can look up any case in Florida and see considerable details going back 20, 30 years. But within Scotland, I can't find out what happened yesterday. I'm at the mercy of individual court officials or press officers to give me basic details. You can only see a criminal complaint or charges in person. And you can only see the complaint. You cannot access any reports, statements, background, evidence. As a reporter, Phillip's case gives the most stark contrast I have ever experienced. I have thousands of pages related to Phillip's time and crimes in Florida. I cannot get 1 page related to his crime in Scotland. Without press reports, there would be no record he killed at all in Scotland. And that's why it took me longer to investigate this story in many ways. Scotland has hardwired me to expect there is no paper trail. Each step in Florida, however, gave a moment of, holy shit, I can get that? So I asked for more. Reporters often cite the expression, justice must be done, and justice must be seen to be done. In Scotland, that means we have to be physically in the court to see if justice exists. But we can't see anything behind the veil of the courtroom. Unlike my colleagues in the US or Canada, there is no equivalent capacity for us to hold justice to account. This story would not be possible without, of course, Josh's family speaking to me as openly as they have. But it also wouldn't be possible without American transparency, and specifically transparency in Florida. The UK Home Office would not comment at various stages of Philip's extradition. Equally, the US Department of Justice released no documents on Philip, the extradition, or the investigations. But their correspondence exists in the records of Florida. Thanks to Florida's extreme transparency, I can learn what went on in Scotland and the UK. I can learn about the country I live in and report on because of foreign open records laws. Scotland's secrecy, compared to Florida's openness, is one of the biggest lessons I'll take away from this entire story. And it's what makes everything in the next 3 chapters possible. And I should add that the secrecy and openness are not without flaws and contradictions. In Scotland, I can get a copy of anyone's birth certificate, as I did Philip's. That's all I can get in Scotland. In Florida, I can get everything, including the name of a child crime victim contained in a deposition, but they redacted social security numbers. I should say, I didn't ask for that victim's name. I did not need that victim's name, but it was not redacted. So we can debate the balance between protection of information within government versus accountability, of the balance between privacy and open justice. And this case does provide stark examples of the extremes of that. But anyone with any experience of government, of call centers, of just, well, life, knows how easy it is for official information to be wrong. And that's true in this story too. The 2007 Judicial Review stated Philip went to Clyde Royal Hospital after the 2003 crash. It is, in fact, the Inverclyde Royal Hospital. There is no such place as Clyde Royal Hospital. And the court heard Philip pleaded guilty to causing death by dangerous driving on February 22nd, 2003. It was December 22nd. It referred to the Fourth Circuit State Attorney in Jacksonville as Harry Sherstein with a U, not Shorstein with an O. Then there's the police report that refers to Josh's son as Josie. Some court reports spelled Philip with one L. Then the Home Office and European Court of Human Rights confirmed to me it was one L. So I repeated that in various freelance updates on the case that I did over the years. Philip has 2 L's, as on his birth certificate. Any official government document should be read with skepticism. But those same crime incident reports and depositions bring up important details. These documents are a mess of changing stories from witnesses. They're deliberate omissions. They're lies. And I can say lies because some witnesses admitted to police and lawyers that they didn't tell the truth at various stages. But within those thousands of pages of sworn testimony, there is a key fact. There were 5 people at the Oak Harbor boat ramp on the night of Tuesday, August 10th, 1999. Joshua Hayes, Phillip Harkins, Terry Glover, Tony Randall, and Leon Madden. There are no alibis suggesting the boys and men were anywhere else. There were occasional suggestions from defense lawyers that someone else could have been involved, and there were some questions about a blue Cadillac, but nothing was ever corroborated between any witnesses. It was never put forward as an alternative theory in any of Phillip's complaints about the case while fighting extradition. There were no other witnesses to the crime itself beyond the 5 boys and men at the boat ramp. Police also interviewed dozens of friends, partners, neighbors. There are 3 key locations in Mayport, all relatively close together. Pioneer Point Apartments, where Phillip and Tony lived, Lakeside Trailer Park off Mayport Road, where Josh and his brother Corey lived, and the Oak Harbor Boat Ramp, or rather, its parking lot. And again, there were 5 boys and men in the parking lot. Josh Hayes, Phillip Harkins, Terry Glover, Tony Randall, and Leon Madden. From the sworn statements, affidavits, and depositions, it's possible to construct a narrative of what happened on August 10th. Everything I'm going to recount is taken from those documents. It doesn't mean people didn't lie, but imagine if the witnesses gave the depositions as testimony to a jury, and a jury came up with a narrative of what happened. All the quotes in this episode are taken directly from sworn statements and depositions, usually under questioning by Phillip's defense lawyers. I keep referring to men and boys. Phillip's defense in Europe kept repeating how young he was, just 20. But he wasn't the youngest at the boat ramp. Tony and Josh were the oldest at 22. Terry Glover was 17. And Leon, referred to repeatedly as Little Leon, had turned 16 just 3 days before the murder. The story of what happened on August 10th started hours before Josh died. In the late afternoon, 18-year-old Courtney Harris was driving with a 15-year-old friend in Mayport when Tony drove past and signaled to stop. He turned round and pulled up alongside, and Phillip, allegedly, stood up through the sunroof and pointed a long black gun at Courtney. Phillip and Courtney knew each other for many years. The younger teen in the vehicle had babysat Tony's daughter. Now, though, Phillip was mad and was looking for Beau, her boyfriend. Courtney said the gun was 3 feet from her. She said she wasn't going to show Phillip where Beau was, so he said he was going to follow them. What followed was a lengthy chase, and Courtney said she was speeding before eventually stopping at a gas station. Courtney tried to get the cashier to let her use his cell phone to call 911, but eventually Tony followed her inside, and she instead pretended to be calling Beau, then saying nobody was home. They drove, supposedly, for almost 2 hours, until Courtney spotted a police car in a parking lot at a drugstore and flagged him down. She later told a deposition, quote, "I have a 4-year-old daughter, and he had a son. He belongs in jail, and that's all there is. No one is going to make me out to be the bad person. I'm the victim. He put the gun in my face. He could have killed me that same night that he killed Josh, the one with the little boy. He had a little boy, and he killed him. I have a daughter." Courtney said Phillip apologized months later through another person and said he was really stressed out. I said allegedly earlier because Phillip was charged with this crime, but the charges were later dropped as the focus turned to the murder. Meanwhile, Terry Glover was working for a landscape business at the time and got off work about when Phillip was following Courtney. Corey, that afternoon, woke up his brother Josh so they could take Josh's partner Tracy to work. Back at their lakeside trailer park home later, Josh told Corey he was looking for a sack of weed. Another Josh who was there at the time said he thought he knew someone at Pioneer Point who was selling. Corey, Josh, and a third man went to Pioneer Point around 6:30 or 6:45. They drove over, and initially there were just a bunch of little kids in the apartment. Phillip and Tony weren't home, but were expected back. About 10 minutes later, Phillip arrived, driven by Tony. Phillip got out with a gun over his shoulder. He said he had just got back from target practice. It was the first time Corey had seen Phillip in several years, and he only realized who it was later on. Corey later said, quote, "If I'd known that, I'd never even went. Me and Phillip has had prior cases involving guns." Leon Madden, little Leon, had babysat Tony's daughter. He rode up on his bicycle at one point while people were outside Phillip's apartment. Corey said Phillip told them it would be 30 minutes and they would drive by the trailer and pick Josh up. One of Phillip's neighbors told Corey not to deal with Phillip, and that reminded him of who he was. Terry Glover saw the others leaving as he arrived with his two friends. Terry knew Phillip well enough he could walk into his apartment without knocking. He described it as a grand central station, and 30 to 40 people a day could go through there. Terry said he sat in front of the TV and started playing video games. He could see Tony Randall and Leon Madden in Phillip's bedroom. Phillip joined them and closed the door, but not all the way. Terry said he heard bits and pieces, but said they were supposed to get marijuana for Josh. He said, quote, "I knew Phillip got the gun out of the closet, for one. You could hear it sliding off the shelf. You can't miss that, not with my hearing." The gun, based on the shell casing at the murder scene, was a Ruger Mini 14. Terry said he had seen Phillip with it on 3 previous occasions. One of them was 2 weeks before the murder. Tony and Leon left the room and the apartment first. Just as earlier in the afternoon, Tony was driving Phillip's black Honda. Phillip said he needed to talk to Terry. Then they went into a separate room. Phillip asked, "You know the guys who just left?" Terry replied, "Well, I seen them, but I don't know them." Phillip said, "Well, yeah, they want a 1/4 pound of weed." "So what?" said Terry. "I'm gonna rob them," said Phillip. Terry replied, "You ain't got no weed." Phillip said, "I got weed, but it's an easy lick." The gun was on the bed, covered with a black sheath. Terry told him, "I got too much to lose." Terry was on probation at the time, and if Phillip wanted his help, he'd have to pay a cut. Terry told him $200 to $300. Phillip agreed. Phillip said Josh had between $750 and $900. Corey knew Josh had $1,000 on him, and a 1/4 pound of weed would cost between $200 and $250. When Josh returned later at the trailer, he took $250 out of his pocket. He put the rest of the money in his sock. Corey claimed Josh had a bit of whiskey and cocaine, though he rarely drank. Toxicology results later found traces of the remains of a small amount of cocaine, but no alcohol. Corey later said of the booze, quote, "That's the only thing that I can say in my heart that made him go get in that car in the first place." About an hour later, little Leon arrived at Josh's trailer. He said Tony knew where to get a sack of weed. Josh pulled his brother aside and said he didn't feel right about it. Leon volunteered to ride with him and Tony. When Josh left between 9 and 9:30, he said he would only be about 10 or 15 minutes. Back at Pioneer Point, Phillip put everything together. He took the smallest of 4 or 5 different clips for the gun. He put it in the bag with the gun, and they left the apartment. Phillip handed Terry a homemade mask when they got in the car. This is Terry's car, a brown Honda Accord. Terry kept it on his lap. Phillip followed a minute or two after Terry, putting the gun in the back seat of Terry's car. Phillip told Terry to drive to Lakeside Trailer Park, where Josh was. They stopped in front of a laundromat diagonal from Josh's trailer, about 30 or 40 feet away. Phillip handed Terry a blunt from his windbreaker pants pocket. Meanwhile, Tony pulled in front of Josh's trailer, and Josh got in with Leon, and they drove off. "Go to the boat ramp," Phillip told Terry. There wasn't much talking after they left Lakeside. Terry later said he'd never committed a robbery with Phillip before. Terry said, quote, "I was kind of antsy. I had never committed a robbery, period. He had taken money from people, but considered that collecting a debt, not a robbery." It was only about a 3-minute drive to the boat ramp. There are 2 routes from the same entrance to the Oak Harbor neighborhood. Terry drove the outer western route, and he believed Tony took the other car along the inner southern route. Remember, Terry is driving his car with Phillip. Tony is driving Phillip's car with Leon in the front passenger seat, Josh in the back. Tony drove down to the boat ramp and reversed back into a parking space near the picnic table. They sat there for maybe 5 or 10 minutes before a brown Honda Accord pulled up. Tony later claimed they were expecting to do a deal with a dude named Q that he had dealt with previously. He wanted a half, and a partner wanted a quarter. Tony claimed he used the payphone at the boat ramp to call Q, who said he was on his way. Tony has never seen him since. They had their windows down, car off. As Terry turned into Seaway Street that leads to the parking lot, he cut his lights and saw Phillip's car, backed in, lights off. At first, when Tony saw the car approaching, he thought it was the guy they would buy drugs from. He said, quote, "But then the car came right on around, sped up, and come on around. It had its brights on, and then we like, oh Lord, what's this? That's when the guys jumped out." As soon as the gun was pointed at them, they put their hands up. They made no attempt to leave, with the gun sitting right there, and having to go past it to get out. Phillip ordered them to get out the fucking car. He told them to put their money on the ground. Josh got out last, but Terry said Josh was really hesitant. Josh supposedly told them, quote, "You're going to have to kill me to take my money." Terry later said Josh started to slide away, like he was trying to give himself room to run. But he would have had to run through the neighborhood in front of him or the woods behind him. Terry assumed he was going to run toward the homes. Terry said that's when Phillip approached him and swung the gun. It swung from Phillip's right hand and hit Josh's left cheek. Terry said his brain came out his head. The gun went off. Josh just dropped. Leon said, quote, I saw everything. I was standing there. I mean, it happened right in front of my face. Terry said, Phillip stood there like in shock for, anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes. We all was standing there in shock. I was really the first one to come around. Tony and Leon, they were still lying on the ground, even after the shot. Terry told Phillip to get in the car. Everybody move, he said. Tony described it as, quote, when the gun went off, the dude fell. I ran, jumped in the car, and left speeding out of control. Leon had jumped in the back, and we didn't know which way the other car was coming, so we was zigzagging through, and we left. Tony said he kept his head down as they drove off. At the time, he wasn't trying to figure out who had the gun in his face. I just want to get out of here, he later said. Leon said, quote, I was a kid scared of adults with guns. Like I say, I was young back then. Faces were covered, voices were muffled. You know, stuff like this carries legends with it. Tony took Leon home and said he then put everything together. But he didn't tell police, and he didn't want to get involved at all. Tony said, quote, prior to that day, before all this happened, Phillip had done some dumb stuff with the gun, with an assault on Courtney. Meanwhile, Terry felt like throwing up. He claimed Phillip was crying. Neither spoke until they were out of the neighborhood and beyond the Atlantic Boulevard Intercoastal Bridge, taking them west away from the beaches. What the hell was you thinking about? Asked Terry. I didn't kill him, I only grazed him, replied Phillip. He's dead. Terry went to stop at a gas station. No, we need to get further from the beach, said Phillip. They drove on and stopped at another gas station. Terry got out to buy cigarettes, and then remembered he wasn't 18 yet, and, turning back to the car, saw some red liquid on the driver's side of the bumper. Terry touched it. He later described it as, quote, bone fragment, brain, and blood. Terry got back in the car. He told Phillip they had to wash the car. They drove towards an all-night car wash. Terry told Phillip they needed to get rid of the gun. Phillip asked if Terry had a screwdriver to break the gun down. Terry didn't. Terry said they drove north over the 2-mile-long Damas Point Bridge and then made their way to a gas station where Phillip bought cigarettes. They drove across the street and Terry washed the car for 8 or 9 minutes. Phillip didn't help. It was after 11 p.m. now. Police were already at the boat ramp investigating the murder.
Yeah, somebody been shot down at the boat dock.
Terry and Phillip returned the way they came, stopping at the top of the bridge and putting on the caution lights. Phillip walked to the edge, threw the masks first, and then the gun, clip, and bullets. Terry said he didn't think the gun went in the water because he didn't hear a splash. Phillip told him, quote, we don't have time to worry about it. Terry drove back towards Mayport and dropped off Phillip because Phillip said he had a female friend in the area. Terry said they should never talk about what happened. It was now 12:30 or 1 in the morning. Phillip got out of the car and they bumped fists. Patricia didn't know her son was dead yet. The next morning, Terry got up and went to work. Quote, like everything was normal. Murder Without End is reported and edited by Tristan Stewart-Robertson. Liam Pollock is the producer. Original music by Dylan Anthony. Artwork by Jason Skinner. Sources for this episode are police reports, sworn statements, and depositions. Journalism like this might be free to listen to, but it isn't free to make. A Murder Without End was created without any funding. All research, archive audio, voiceovers, and music were sourced and paid for by myself. So if you enjoyed what you heard, please share it with your friends, leave a review, and visit our website, tomorrow.is, to donate what you can. Any support you can spare would be invaluable. Thank you for listening.